Funding for this program is provided by Annenberg CPD to advance excellent teaching.
Is gender genetically based? Or do we learn to be feminine or masculine?
Let's get the rhythm of the feet.
How important is gender to children? What sexual stereotypes does our culture create? Sex and gender, this time on Discovering Psychology.
Do it again. Okay. That's good. Here it comes. Come on, baby. Okay. Got one shoulder.
Oh, God.
How about a big boy?
Oh, you got your boy.
Even before we ask about a newborn's health, we want to know whether it's a girl or a boy. Sex is the first and perhaps the most basic way in which we categorize people throughout their lives. Why is it so important to know the sex of an infant? Because we have very different perceptions of what each sex is like, what they're capable of, how they should be treated, what's best for them, and even what their value is to society. And in turn, these ideas color our perception of them, from birth through adulthood. Research by Zella Luria and Jeffrey Rubin has revealed just how differently parents see their infant males and females, even within 24 hours of birth. Daughters are typically described as beautiful, delicate, and weak, while sons are seen as strong, coordinated, and alert, even when there are no differences between them in weight, health, and strength. The differences that do exist between males and females at birth are biologically innate, universal, and essential for reproduction. Differences in sexual organs, genes, and hormones. The significance of sex categorization goes far beyond biological characteristics. The fact of being male or female directs all of us toward very different psychological and social environments. The different cultural definitions of masculinity and femininity, different expectations and experiences, all the psychological and social meanings attached to the categories of male and female are what we mean by gender. Although biological sex establishes the initial categorization, gender is learned rather than innate. We define women and men not only by their sexual organs, but also by the way they behave, how they look and dress, what rules they follow in order to be acceptable and appropriate, and what roles they are allowed or encouraged to play. And these characteristics are subject to enormous cultural influences. In fact, when we talk about something as basic as femininity and masculinity, we're really talking about gender roles. These roles are two sets of traits and behaviors that are supposed to identify and distinguish men and women. Like other roles, they are based on socially prescribed expectations, in this case, about ideal sexual types. The feminine gender role in the United States is gentle, emotional, dependent. The masculine role is aggressive, independent, dominant. Gender roles are often portrayed as polar opposites, and even mutually exclusive. But psychological research has found that not only is it possible for men to be feminine and women to be masculine some or all of the time, but also that masculinity and femininity are not opposites at all. People can have both masculine and feminine characteristics. They can be both strong and emotional, gentle and assertive. They are defined as psychologically androgynous, a term coined by Sandra Bem, who argues that a blend of masculinity and femininity results in greater behavioral adaptiveness. It's also commonly assumed that many observed sex differences in behavior result from either biological or social forces, when in fact it's usually a complex interweaving of both. For example, one of the most reliably found sex differences in children around the world is that boys are more likely than girls to engage in rough and tumble play. This male-female difference seems to be linked to sex hormones. However, the amount and form of social play is shaped by cultural learning experiences. This sex difference in social play occurs in most mammals and has been studied extensively in two animal species, the vervet monkey and the Norway rat, as seen in this original experimental footage taken by developmental neuroscientist Michael Meany of McGill University.
If you look at both rats and monkeys, and you look at the kids, what you find is that the boys and the girls are doing very different things. That the boys are more likely to be involved in rough play, wrestling, boxing, what have you, vigorous forms of physical play. The girls are more likely to be involved in more quiet types of social activities, equally social, but quieter, grooming, tending to infants. These are exactly the same type of differences that you see in young nursery school children. The boys and girls are using very different types of motor activities. Boys are using gross motor activity, more vigorous forms of activity. Females, it's more fine motor activity, more discrete type of movements. So functionally, what occurs is that young boys and young girls engage in behaviors as juveniles, as adolescents, from which they're most likely to benefit from as adults. And they don't do this because they think that later on down the road it's going to have a payoff for them. They do it because it feels good. It's fun. And different types of behaviors are fun for males than for females. These behaviors, as with any behavior, stimulate different parts of the brain. And these particular regions in the brain are different in males and females because of the actions of sex hormones during the perinatal life. The different activities stimulate different areas of the brain. Males and females find different types of activities pleasurable as a function of this different level of stimulation in the brain. What we're looking at here is the real essence of the interaction that occurs between hormonal events and environmental events. Early in life, the sex hormones cause differences in the brain. This is a hormonal event. These differences in the brain later lead to differences in behavior, differences in the type of experiences that young boys and young girls have. These differences in experience, an environmental event, then lead to differences in behavior amongst the adults.
Another example of the interaction of biology and psychology in creating sex differences is physical health. Contrary to the stereotype that men are strong and women are weak, it is males who are more vulnerable to disease, physical disorders, and death. In fact, they're more vulnerable in all stages of the life cycle, from the womb to an early arrival at the tomb, unfortunately. Biological factors clearly play a role. For example, men are at greater risk for any physical handicaps and diseases that are genetically based, including recessive disorders such as hemophilia and color blindness.